Ukraine and to the organizers of this terrific event and for inviting me. It's sort of a personal milestone for me this year. It's been 20 years since I first came to Kyiv to open up a civil society project for Freedom House here, and I'm especially delighted to be back speaking with you all today as an academic. We've been talking today and yesterday about how vital reform is for Ukraine's security. And to continue along the path of reform is indeed really crucial. But those reforms cannot be implemented without society taking on an important role as a partner with the state. But how much is society in Ukraine actually with the state? Now, to my mind, an important but critical test of the relationship between state and society in Ukraine is how willing is society to pay their taxes, to fulfill their duty of citizenship. And perhaps taxation is the only duty of citizenship that requires individuals to give up something towards their state, not only once, but on an annual basis, if not more often than that. So I'm going to present, with a brief slide presentation, some of my findings from my forthcoming book, Taxes and Trust. And overall, looking at, it's based upon a lot of surveys I've been doing since right after the Orange Revolution, and the last one was this past November, coordinated with the Razumkov Center, which has been a terrific partner in this endeavor. The overall major finding with respect to Ukraine, however, is that citizen trust in government, which has always been low throughout the 25 years of post-Soviet Ukraine's history, has decreased even further to perhaps horrific new lows. And there's a major need, perhaps a major overall policy prescription here required with respect to the area that I'm concerned about, building trust in the tax administration, but also more broadly, building trust in government. And this resonates with some of the comments that Yevhen had earlier. Now, there we go. So I've been asking questions about people's relationship with the tax system in Poland, Russia, and Ukraine. And you cannot ask people directly, do you pay your taxes, in a public opinion poll and expect to get an honest answer, unless perhaps you're surveying in Finland or another Scandinavian country. But you can ask the question, would you follow the tax laws even if you do not consider them to be unfair, even if you do not consider them to be fair? And when I first asked this question in Poland in 2004, 83% of Poles stated that they would obey tax laws even if they considered them to be unfair. That number held up about 5 years later in 2010. In Russia, in 2004, I asked the same question, and 53% of Russians said they would obey tax laws even if they disagreed with them. In Ukraine, meanwhile, in 2005, 1 year exactly after the Orange Revolution started, only 36% of Ukrainians said they would obey tax laws even if they disagreed with them. That number is held up more or less the same in 3 subsequent polls that I've taken with Razumkov in 2010, 12, and 15. And to my mind, there are 3 basic state approaches that every state can take to try and increase tax compliance on an individual level. First, they can try to coerce taxpayers, to deter them, if you will, into complying out of fear of punishment. Next, you can try to gain citizen trust and confidence so that taxpayers will comply out of quasi-voluntary nature, out of trust in response to the state's efforts to increase tax revenue. And the third area is to try and improve customer service by emphasizing procedural fairness and how the tax bureaucrats act individually and with the taxpayers. Now, all states have a combination of these 3 approaches. It's, however, depending upon which of the 3 is emphasized more than the others, that can have an impact upon how society will react to the state. And so my focus of my analysis this year comes from a desire to focus on the ground level, on the street level state-society relations and how they interact. And in my book, I go into greater detail and explain through statistical regressions and such that in Poland, Poles have been acting out of less fear of their state and out of more trust in their state, and they're upholding their obligations to the state more like citizens. And by and large, the time right after 1989 in Poland was a time of extraordinary politics, unusual politics, as happens perhaps after every revolution. But the Poles went out of their way, recognized that they had a government of, by, and for Poles for the first time in generations, and their tax institutions likewise went out of the way to put their tax bureaucrats on the front lines, on television, on radio, having information booths set up, such that by the end of the 1990s, there was a survey done that showed the tax office in Poland was the most trusted administrative organization of the state at the time. And Poles certainly knew after a few years that if they filled out their tax forms, they'd get money back through rebates for prescription, education, and other medical expenses. In Russia, by contrast, you have a situation in which there is more fear of the state and little trust of the state, making Russians to act like subjects as they fulfill their obligations if they're deterred, if they're coerced into doing so. Ukraine, on the other hand, as we know, is a different state altogether. It has a different relationship between state and society. Here, there has been less fear, traditionally, of the state, and there has been less trust. So taxpayers function more like tax slackers, if you will. They're able to avoid interacting with the state and the tax state if they can get away with it. Moreover, Ukrainians, I've found, are the most disconnected of the three states I study from their tax system. When I asked them, what is their personal income tax rate in your country today? In Poland, it was 22% said they knew it. In Russia, in 2004, 38% knew the correct rate, and 46% in 2010. Meanwhile, from 2005 to 2015, only somewhere between 9 and 13% of Ukrainians know what the personal income tax rate is, even despite having a flat rate income tax. If I ask the Ukrainians, Russians, and Poles, during the past 5 years, have you interacted with employees, with bureaucrats from the tax service? In Poland, when I first started surveying, the number was almost 50%. 1 of every 2 Poles had interaction with the tax bureaucrats. In Russia, it's about 1 in 4, and in Ukraine, it's somewhere between 15 and 19%. And asking Ukrainians, how satisfied are you with how the state spends your money as taxpayers? Russia and Ukraine, about 18% were satisfied. And granted, we're in a world today in which there are low levels of trust and low levels of satisfaction globally with respect to how states spend taxpayers' money. But in Ukraine, it was 9% in 2010, which was half of that of its neighbors, and it dropped even further this past November to 6%. Now, I've also asked questions about, for those people who had interacted with the tax bureaucrats, I asked questions, how satisfied were you with the result, with the outcome of having met with a tax bureaucrat? I also asked them, how satisfied were they with the conduct, with the behavior of the tax bureaucrats with whom they met? And the idea being that if you walk into a tax office and are told that you have to give more money to the state, that your tax bill is higher than what you expected, how you're treated in that moment can make a big impact upon how you're going to behave towards the state and your willingness to comply and interact with the state in the future. What we find in looking in the 2005 and 2010 surveys is that there are very low levels of satisfaction and willingness to obey the state, even if people were satisfied with both how they were treated and how the result. And indeed, if you look at the yes boxes in both of these tables, there's 51 and 54% of Ukrainians who had interacted with the tax bureaucrats and had satisfied service, had satisfied result, were willing to obey the state in the future with respect to the tax laws. And these numbers, by the way, were lower than even of the Russians who were dissatisfied with how they were treated and with the result. Now, this past November, I saw the figure, if you look at the yes box of 70% jump, and that's an encouraging sign. That means that taxpayers who did interact with the state and were satisfied with the result were willing 70% of the time to state that they would obey an unfair tax law. Further, the level of trust in the states, we've been talking about that perhaps in the background yesterday and today, is extremely low in Ukraine. Asking questions, does the state fulfill its obligations to citizens? In Russia and Poland, The years that you see there were about 21 and 24%. In Ukraine, it was half that from 2005 to 2012, and it halved again this past November. Do you think the state, you think you can trust the state to do what is right? Again, as you see in that highlighted yellow figure at the bottom right, it's 6% in November, half of what it was previously in previous surveys in Ukraine. This may be a bottoming out of trust in the state, but it's excessively low.
I think bottoming out, when it gets to the bottom, you've pretty much got to the bottom, haven't you? So just very briefly, if you could, to wrap up, Mark.
Sure. There are further questions I could add on trust in the state. I do want to mention that one encouraging thing that I sort of saw is I asked questions about people's religious backgrounds. And perhaps it's Russian propaganda, perhaps it's just press in the West, but there's a lot of newspaper print that's been printed in English about how deeply divided this country is. Well, if you look at the differences between how Catholics and non-Catholics respond to the question of would you obey an unfair tax law, by 2015, that number has basically come together. So there is some sort of unification, if you will. And my final sort of overall point is that, oh, sorry, I'll go back. Maybe I'll end with that.
You're being very harsh on yourself, Mark. Very harsh on yourself. Thank you very much indeed.
My humor got ahead of me. Bottom line is that we need to focus when we're thinking about Ukraine today. How are we going to build this trust that is at a bottom level, both when you're looking at a specific institution like the tax administration, as well as whether you're looking at all of the government and the state as a whole, in order to make sure that people in this country feel it is their state, they trust their state is treating them fairly, and their state is providing them with the goods and services that they expect. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much.